there's a consistent, I don't even want to say argument, because it's unfair to call it an argument. It is a political rhetoric. It is a discourse that is taking place in America right now. And because of things like social media, the access to global news is pretty close to instant. By that I mean, if you consider how long it took in the days of the freedom riders, the guys who would jump on their horses and ride from one village or town or city to another to deliver news of war or news of a murder or news of a new political change. The newspapers became an expedient way for people to gather news that wasn't happening in their local community. I remember asking my grandmother, who's 92 now, I remember asking her once, what was it like during the Great Depression? She said, the Great Depression. The Great Depression. When was the Great Depression again? I said it was 1929, Grandma. She said, yeah, I was 10 or 12 years old then, but we lived on a farm in East Texas, and we raised everything on our own, and we never really went to town. It was a real treat to go to town on a buggy, and I didn't go to Dallas until I was an adult. Now where she lives is further from Dallas than it was then, and it's a 2-hour trip. So I can't imagine what it was like on a buggy trying to get to Dallas. That was probably quite a trip. But she lived in a world that was very isolated from news, isolated from world events, isolated from what's going on anywhere else. She didn't know because she wasn't in school at the time that everything that happened with the Depression happened, that World War II brought it to an end. Those were events that happened in her lifetime that weren't in her history books. They weren't in her school books. They happened simultaneously to her living, but there wasn't access to the type of news and information that we have today, where 24/7 you could find a channel, I promise you, whether it's Al Jazeera or ILTV, you can find a channel that has a live broadcast right now on Facebook, on YouTube. You can get access to what's going on around the world, anywhere in the world, 24/7. Now, the challenge with that is everyone who produces news has an agenda. I want to say that again, just in case you think I was not thinking through those words. Everyone who produces news has an agenda. The days of objective media, of completely objective, completely third party, outside of the system, unconcerned with the outcome, simply reporting the facts, I'm afraid, has been gone for a long, long, long time. I would be brave enough to even say that in my lifetime, I have not known, cognitively aware of, any news source that didn't have an agenda. Now, I'm not a journalist, and I have a few friends who are professional journalists, but not a lot. And I can tell you, even today, that we can't get through a 10 o'clock evening newscast without one or more, usually all of them at some point, converting during their presentation of a story's events, their own opinions, their own feelings, their own emotions injected into the story. Even if it's to say, these are the facts, this is what happened, here's how I feel about it. That's a very common thing. That's not objective journalism. That's superimposing that individual's feelings over the facts. In the case of the Duke Lacrosse alleged rape event, it was later discovered that the event never happened, and yet the news publication that was responsible for carrying the story forward didn't apologize to the people whose lives had been destroyed for being accused of doing some horrific thing. I mean, can you imagine that you wake up on a Monday morning and there's your boyfriend's face slapped on the front of a national newspaper as a rapist? Before the trial? Before the trial? How would your relationship go forward? Would you want to be the girl known as the one who's dating the guy who's on the front page of every national newspaper as a rapist? So to think that that story didn't have an impact on their academic life because they were in college on scholarships for their athletics, but their academics were required to be able to graduate from college and have their degree. You don't think it had an impact on that? On their athletic careers, for sure, in school, maybe professionally afterward? But maybe their financial future was directly impacted. Their relational future is directly impacted. There was a lot of fallout, if you will, over the story itself. And the irony is, the fallout cannot be undone. And an apology to say, well, we kind of made it all up, at this point, is beyond irrelevant. It would be as if someone said, well, so-and-so is a pedophile. Just joking. Well, which is it? Are you just joking, or are they really a pedophile? Is that person really dangerous to my children, to be around my children, or are you just joking? Because that's a pretty serious thing to joke about. It's also a horrendous idea to think that our freedom of speech has been stretched so far that to lie for our own purposes, to outright lie for our own agenda, is okay. That I could tell you whatever lie that I wanted to. That I would ask you to raise your hands if I could see you, if this was a live crowd. Raise your hands if. Maybe you could send a little like or just a little heart or something to know that you're paying attention. Raise your hand if when you watch those, what we would call cop shows, when the investigator or the detective lies to the suspect about some piece of information they have, or how their compadre is telling the truth and outing them, or about how they managed to gather the information that they're being accused of. When the officer lies to get a confession, don't you feel dirty about that? Don't you feel smarmy? Don't you feel like justice has been pushed askew when, in order to gain what they would call the truth, they use a lie to gather it? See, to me, that doesn't seem right. It doesn't seem like something law enforcement officers should have the privilege of doing, to intentionally use disinformation, fake news, or, in another word, a lie, to be able to gain the information that they want to gain. Manipulation is another word for it. People use it all the time. It's been used in courtrooms. It's been used in books and movies and theater for years. Probably as long as humans have been around. But to think that we hold in high esteem what has become by many to be known as the fourth element of our government, our news media, to hold them in esteem and expect of them truth, objective truth, just the facts as best they can be gathered, not facts manipulated by the ones that I like and I don't like. I'll leave in and magnify and only point to the facts that suit my own causes. I will completely ignore or put on page 12 the real facts, like those stories that have the magnificent headline. But when you get into the story, it has nothing to do with the headline. In the world of social media, we call that clickbait. It's where you say whatever you want to. You're not going to believe what happened when so-and-so did such and such. And then you read the story, and it's about them buying a new pair of shoes. And there's no sensationalism in the story, just in the headline, just to grab your attention, just to get you to look. Now, how has this journalistic behavior impacted the rest of society? On the one hand, let's think of the young man who's so determined for fame was part of the riots that were destroying a very, very expensive school. And he was going up and down the hallways, starting fires, kicking in doors, destroying private property, taking people's stuff, the whole 9 yards. And when asked by a reporter on the scene why he was doing it, he said, it's for those people who don't have the same equality. They don't have access to education. They don't have the same income that we have. They need social justice to have income equality. I'm like, okay, those are great buzzwords, but how does your destroying someone else's building have anything to do with that? It was like a small version of an Occupy Wall Street. Well, a few weeks later, he showed up on a nightly interview show. And the commentator, the host of the show, asked him, so help me understand then, how is it that you came to be involved in this, destruction? And they showed some of the footage of him tearing up things on the campus, and they talked about his little quick interview with the reporter. And he said, so social justice and income equality, obviously those are big buzzwords that tells me that you're in the know of what's going on in the world, but why you, as a perpetrator or as an actor or as a leader in this revolution, what causes you to be a part of it? And he said, well, it's just not fair that people don't get to go to college. He said, well, but you're going to college. He said, yeah. He said, well, it's not fair that the ones that do, some of them have to go to community college because they just don't have the money to go to school. He said, but you do have the money to go to school. In fact, the school where you go to school, the same school you were destroying, costs $60,000 a semester. That's pretty handsome money. Who is it that you're fighting for? He said, well, anybody who doesn't get to go to school. He's like, so you don't have a friend, you don't have a face in mind, you don't know who it is that you're representing? It almost seems like a temper tantrum without a cause, without a purpose. That even if you win your temper tantrum, no one will know it. So really, what was the point of your behavior? And the young man leans in and he goes, got me on your show, didn't it? All right, so here's how that directly relates to fake news. The end game is the point. Lie, steal, cheat, manipulate, say whatever you must to accomplish the end game. There was a news commentator who's been on media in major platforms as the nightly talk show host, as a commentator, as a war commentator for decades. I grew up with this name. And after the election was over, when Mitt Romney competed against Barack Obama, and someone asked him, did you know that the news story you were running about Mitt Romney was not wholly accurate? And he said, yeah. They said, well, did you realize that there was actually no fabric of truth to it at all? There was nothing in the story other than the man's name that was factual, that was truth. Were you aware of that? And he said, I was. They said, well, as a leader of the organization, didn't you feel like it was your responsibility to step up and tell others, whoever was responsible for that story, that maybe there was not any truth in it? He said, it was my story. Okay, so now we get down to brass tacks. He not only conveyed the story, he not only approved the story as a mentor, it was his story. Okay, so that at minimum expresses, I'm taking responsibility for this. That's great. But he carried on to say, I knew that some of that information wasn't correct. In fact, some of it I just made up of whole cloth. And they said, well, did you know that at the time that you ran the story, or did you just discover that later? He said, oh, I knew. And they said, well, why would you, because he's now resigned from that position, left that news media organization, no longer is our nightly anchor man, no longer is our war correspondent, no longer is our person we turn to for good, honest news. He doesn't represent that anymore. He's lost his profession. And his legacy will be remembered for being the guy who lied on television in the form of a news story and got away with it. And they asked him, this impacts your legacy, that obviously impacts your career. It's over as a journalist. Was it worth it? And his reply was this: Mitt Romney's not our president, is he? That was his answer. Mitt Romney is not our president, is he? Now let me put those two stories next to each other, because here's what we're hearing. That a man with decades of experience and millions of people who have watched him and trusted that the words coming out of his mouth, the purpose of his job, the intent of his heart was to inform the people, had an agenda in his mind that had nothing to do with his role. It had nothing to do with his actions except to accomplish that agenda. And that agenda in this moment was to keep Mitt Romney out of the presidency. And he was willing to sacrifice his career, his legacy, and his good name to accomplish that end. That's what's informing our college students, that it's okay to riot, to destroy people's stuff, to behave like juveniles throwing a temper tantrum when their only end game is to get on the news, to have their name known, their 15 seconds of fame. It's frustrating to realize that this end game mentality means that any behavior is justified if the end is accomplished. Any behavior is justified if the end is accomplished. Now, as much as it pains me to know it is a reality, and it may pain some of you to realize we're going to have to come to grips with the way this changes the world. But there are men and women who stand in the pulpit on Sundays in front of the cameras Monday through Friday at 10 o'clock in the evening for our newscasts, on the street corner, in the coffee shop, dare I say, in our lecture halls of our top universities, not just in America, around the world, who have succumbed to this idea that I can say whatever I want to, I can say whatever I need to. The truth has no relationship to what I'm saying. There is no absolute truth that I have to be responsible for or accountable to, as long as when I'm done talking, my ends have been met. Political rhetoric uses it all the time. I will tell you whatever skewed facts, limited facts, eliminated facts I need to get you to decide to act in a way that suits me, benefits me in the end. Even if it means the end of a career, the destruction of a legacy, the tarnishing of a good name. Mine or somebody else's, doesn't matter. If in the end I achieve my goal. If in the end I have reached my ultimate desire. The ends justify the means. I don't care about your reputation. I don't care about your business opportunities. I don't care about your family life. I don't care about your imprisonment or lack thereof. Another good example, when Benghazi happened, there was a young man who had made a video. I'm not going to say his video was good or bad. Frankly, I've never seen the video, and I'm not concerned with the content of that video other than to say it was offensive to some people. But the accusation that his video started the attack on Benghazi was an outright lie, and it was known to be a lie at the time that it happened. It's been proven to be a lie since then in congressional testimony, that there was no relationship between the making of the video, offensive or otherwise, and what happened in Benghazi. They're two totally different events. But using that storyline destroyed his life. In fact, there are some people whose lives have been ended over manipulated news stories. Now, I have this, what I believe is realistic fear, that now that we've given that kind of manipulative behavior a name, a label, a marker, that name, that label, that marker is being applied to things that are not fake news. But since we now have something to call it fake news, if we don't like it, we call it fake news. If it offends us, we call it fake news. If it's untrue to us in our truth, we call it fake news. Understand the confusion that this brings to people who are truly seeking the truth. Understand this confusion that this brings to political evolutions around the globe, one continent to the next. If truth isn't worth holding on to and distinguishing from every other form of lie or manipulation or the ends justifying the mean, if truth isn't worth holding on to, our world is in trouble. There's a reason that a compass has an arrow on it. Because you got to know where north is. Without knowing north from south, you'll never know east from west. Without knowing where north is, you'll never know where south is. And we don't get to randomly choose one day to the next where north is. Yes, I know there's magnetic north and there's true north, and different seasons of the year it moves a little bit as the earth spins on its axis and its tilt. Yeah, I get that. But generally speaking, there's a direction of north. And there are rules that are applied through the course of our life in navigation. Here's a silly one for you. Did you know that when you turn on your Siri maps, what Siri does is actually reorient the map so that you're always following the direction up the screen? But other map systems always make north the top. Why? Because most of us who learn to use maps in school learned that wherever the top of the map is, that's north. And you may be going right, or you may be going left, or you may be going down, but north is always at the top. And if you learn to orient your life that way when you're navigating, no matter what map you use, you'll always understand, maybe I'm going 10 degrees to the north, off of north center. I'm going 10 degrees northeast. But at least I know where north is. Take the same set of directions and turn the map upside down, and you have a disaster in the making. That's the kind of thing that we're seeing when truth gets twisted and manipulated to the point that no one can identify original truth at all. And that anything that inconveniences us, anything that feels to me like, I don't want that to be true, I can simply slap the label of fake news on it and I don't have to listen to it. Well, that whole process is now being used in bullies in middle schools and high schools. The relationships between two groups of people in schools. I tagged a gentleman by the name of Wade White on this video. I'm going to encourage you to click on his name. It's an active tag there. That tag will take you to his page. Scroll down and find the poem that he did for Father's Day. Better yet, go to his MBC, that's M as in Mary, not N as in Nancy, MBC fan page, measured by character. This is a guy who speaks in public schools 50, 60 times a year. And his primary objective is helping young people to understand, because he was a father who lost his teenager, helping them to understand the value of life. Basically a suicide prevention intervention. But it's a big production. It's a big show with videos and lights and screens and sound systems. And the schools set aside an assembly time for him to come in and talk to the students. And when he talks to them about the value of life, about how important they are as human beings, about what their relationship is like between them and one other person, a friend, a frenemy. When that conversation comes up, many of them begin to let down their barriers. The barriers of race, the barriers of gangs, the geeks versus the athletes, the band geeks versus the drama geeks, the academics versus the sluffers. And suddenly, when that truth is laid out there that you're all valuable, that your life is important, that you need to guard and protect your own life and the life of your friends, all of those fake barriers, the fake news of gang rivalry, begins to evaporate in the presence of reality and truth. And when young people have seen the loss of their friends to drunk driving, or the loss of their friends recently, a local high school here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area had to deal with prom night execution of one of their students. In a road rage incident, a 19-year-old's life was taken. In a road rage incident. when students who feel like, because they're in that time of life that they feel invincible, when they feel like nothing can really harm them, and then they see a life taken that close to them, they want answers. And they don't want the answers that are about division. They don't want the answers that are about fermenting more hatred. They don't want the answers about, well, somebody's got to pay and somebody's got to be blamed. They want to know, do I matter? Would there be any brouhaha if I was the one? If I died in that car accident, if I took my own life, if I were hit by a car, if I were shot in a road rage incident, would anybody care? Would anybody even notice? And as they begin to ask those questions, they don't want fake news. They don't want lies. They don't want manipulation. In fact, most young people today would rather face the hard truth and plow through it to find a real answer than to be lied to and manipulated. It's just fact. Now, the sad part is the ends justifying the means has become the MO of so many for so long that they don't know how to do anything else. You may have heard the phrase, speak the truth in love. It's one thing to say those things that might offend and might hurt because you need to say them, because you want to get them off your chest. It's another thing to say those things that are in truth, that are absolute truth, that are foundational, fixed principles. Knowing that it might hurt someone else because they've been living a lie or believing a lie. If you've been told all your life that fresh cut grass is broccoli, when I put broccoli on your plate, you think I'm nuts. Think about that for a moment. What lies have you believed all your life because someone has told you them? They've been reinforced by everybody around you because the circle of people that you run with believe the same lie. They live out the same lie. They don't have foundational truth. They don't have principles to anchor their life on. There was a video, I'm trying to remember exactly where I saw it, but it was a group of guys walking through a casino. They were all having a good time. Another group of guys walking the other way through a casino. They're all having a good time. One of them is looking at his cell phone, not looking at where he's going, and he bumps into the oncoming group. In a matter of seconds, that goes from, sorry, excuse me, I wasn't looking, which I don't think ever happened, no apology, but a demanding of my space, how dare you run into me while I was looking at my phone, to an all-out shootout, like the OK Corral. All of them got guns out, they're shooting at random, they're shooting at each other, they're shooting people in the building, they're just shooting, no cause. Because they've been told there's really no consequences for this, most people that commit a murder get away with it. They've been told that it doesn't really matter. If you hate that person enough, you have a right to be happy. And the lies and the fake news and the propaganda and the manipulation have been so strong for so long. Even in their little circle of friends, all of them with their guns pulled, shooting at each other and shooting around each other, there's some belief that human life isn't that important. And if it is, only mine is, not anybody else's. And that lie has been perpetrated for so long because there's another agenda. Now, I hate to leave you hanging, but this is one of those questions that if I answer the question for you, I cheat you. This is one of those questions that in your own life, you've got to be able to put your finger on it, put your thumb on it and go, that's it. That's an anchor. Now, don't hear me say that truth is ambiguous. It is not. Truth is absolute. Gravity is a truth. North is a truth. If you have weight and you take up space, you are matter, that's a truth. It's hard to get around those truths. There are other truths that are someone else's projection of truth. It may be your truth, it's not anybody else's truth. You might live in your own little world and march to the beat of a different drummer. That's not what I'm talking about. But the question that you have to ask that no one else can ask is about your value in this life. Why are you here? What were you made for? What is your purpose? I can't answer that for you. I can't project it on you. And while there is an absolute answer to that question, and there is a truth to that question, and there are millions of possibilities that you can collapse into probabilities, there is a true answer to that question. But if you believe the lies that human life is not that valuable, if you believe the lies that you're not special, you're no different than anybody else, that your life is just as much a wreck as everybody around you, that there really is no hope for changing it, then living that lie will cause you to not enjoy what you were made for, to not do what you were put here for, to not impact the lives that you were called to impact. As leaders and influencers, I want you to understand the impact that you have. Every time you pick up your device to promote something on social media, every time you share a story, there's someone out there with a little less knowledge than you have, a little less access than you have. The inability to know, is this fake or is it real? And no, I'm not a proponent of the idea of slapping the label fake news on everything we disagree with or don't feel good about. And yes, sometimes I intentionally share those stories, like I told you a couple of days ago. I intentionally share those stories to make you think. I'm here to challenge you to think, to help you find ways to think, to encourage you in how to think, but I will not tell you what to think. I will tell you the truth as best I have discovered it. I will point you to truth that I know to be absolute. I will share ideas with you that are notions of my own. And I will do all I can to label them as different. Even in what I consider to be the absolute truth, the infallible Word of God, even then the authors said, Paul said several times, this is not scripture, this is Paul speaking. Understand the difference between what I know to be absolute truth and what I feel like is my opinion. Even Paul said it. We can go back as far as you want to in history, in human history, in recorded human history. Even our greatest minds, our greatest thinkers, have changed their minds on major ideas. You know, the theory of evolution, most people attribute that to Einstein. But near his death, he confessed to faith in God. It's a pretty significant factor. Did you know that, I believe it was our 30th president? 30 or 35th. Somebody will have to look that up. This was in 1961-62, before the Roe v. Wade, but he was an opponent of abortion. He didn't believe in big government. He was a member of the NRA. Very popular. Very conservative. The Democrat. Assassinated because of some of his beliefs. Believed in a strong military to deter violence. Believed in gun ownership for individual citizens. Didn't believe in abortion. Didn't believe in large government and unbelievable government handouts. Just go back and read it. But JFK was not a Republican. He was not a conservative. He was a Democrat. And at the time that he lived, what he believed was mainstream, meaning more people believed that than didn't. And then, of course, we had the Vietnam War, we had the hippie era, we had different ways of thinking about war, and different ways of thinking about what's going on in America, and different ways of thinking about who America is and will become. And then a lot of the people who resisted fighting in the war, who decided to stay home and not go to war, went to college, became our media. And their belief that our intervention in Vietnam and in Korea and in Cuba and on and on and on and on was an invasion against communism and we were wrong, they still hold those beliefs. And they've grown up in the media for decades in the media, and they have an agenda in the media, and they're willing to live to that end regardless of the means required to get there. So Roe v. Wade is very popular with the media. Communism is very popular with the media. It's the worldview they've grown up with. It's the people they hang out with. It's the echo chamber that they hear. It's the stuff they believe. And the friends that they hang with reinforce that, like a gang mentality. Nobody loves you like your gang. Forget about your family. Forget about the people on your street. Forget about the people you went to school with. Forget about your church. We're your gang. You got to hang with us. We're the only ones that will protect you. We're the only ones that care about you. That same kind of mentality runs the media. And that's how we get fake news. And individuals who have an axe to grind, they have a certain way of hearing information and news. And their agenda is obvious. Ultimately, you have to ask the question, what am I here for? Well, what am I designed for? How does that fake news impact me? How will that information that I'm about to spread, that I'm about to share, that I'm about to tell, impact the world? What if we lied about foreign leaders? What if we lied about other governments? What if we lied about events that were going on in different parts of the world? I have firsthand experienced what I would consider to be poverty in Africa. And I was challenged by someone else who watches this video who said simply, what you saw may be what you saw. It was. What I experienced is what I experienced. That's the reality that I know. And in my limited view, it is truth. And he pointed out the fact there are 54 sovereign nations on the African continent. And some of them are the wealthiest on earth. That's a very good point. So does it make my experience fake news? Or does it make it a limited worldview? Of course, I have to follow that with the question and say, well, if 54 of the sovereign nations on Africa hold some of the greatest wealth on the planet, why do you still have poverty? I'm just saying, if you've got the money and you figured it out, why are people still starving to get in your backyard? You have to ask the same question here, though, right? We have kids who don't get school lunches during the summer because they're not at school. They don't get school breakfast during the summer because they're not at school. And so they drive campaigns to make sure that these kids are delivered food and they're delivered their lunches, and they're, even when they're not in school, the public school system is trying to feed them. I believe that's socialism. I don't believe it's the right thing to do. I don't believe that the government should be doing that. I believe the local community, the churches should be empowering the families through tax cuts, etc., to have the resources to be able to do that themselves. But nobody asks the question, you know, if the teachers, if both parents are working, or if mom is working while they're in school, and them being home for the summer means no lunches or no breakfasts. Yeah, breakfast is fourth breakfast, remember? So, yeah, there was a little movie about that. Then who's loving on them? I mean, if we assume that their teachers take good care of them while they're in the classroom, and their teachers affirm them, and their teachers tell them you matter, and they have a chance to go to an assembly and hear somebody like Wade White say, you matter. Your life is important to us. Guard it, protect it, take care of it. Who tells them that during the summer? Do they fall into the gang mentality at the same time that they fall into summer brain drain? What happens to their social skills over the summer? Who do they hang out with? Who influences them? Do they get more fake news from the media, from the video games, from the videos, from the movies, from television shows? Are they being filled with lies rather than truth? I think these are some things that we need to think about. As leaders, we need to be responsible for them. We need to hold on to truth, and we need to proclaim it regularly, loudly. Because the world's not going to do that without us. They all have their own agenda. It's up to us as leaders. I want you to get passionate about fake news. Not about slapping labels on everything that you disagree with and calling it fake news, but about proclaiming the truth as loudly as often as you can. 17-1 is what it takes to overcome a negative word with a positive word. We got work to do. Start proclaiming some truth. Start sharing with people that you know and you care about how much you love them, how much you appreciate them. What specifically do you appreciate about them? Display public displays of appreciation. Stop them on the street and go, I really like the way you did this. Love on them. I don't know anybody. I have never met a human being who doesn't thrive on appreciation. It's a fuel for the human soul like you wouldn't believe. Use it. It costs you nothing. Nothing. And it's not fake news. I know today has been a really weird show, but I hope that you will take it to heart and understand how powerful the words are that you say. Telling a lie for your own end game is destructive on so many levels. It can crush people's future. Don't do that. Appreciation, on the other hand, doesn't hurt anybody, but it makes everybody feel good. Go appreciate somebody today. Go love on an absolute stranger today. Buy him a cup of coffee. Buy him a donut. Just tell him, hey, thanks for being here, for being you, for being alive. See what happens. I'm J Loren Norris, and you've been watching Tell It Like It Is TV. Don't forget to smash that subscribe button and share this video with somebody else who might care to be appreciated.